Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Museum of the African Diaspora, and again, thank you so much for your patience. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs here, and one of my favorite parts of my job is working with Brian Terry. I love the programs that we do together, so thank you all for being here today and sharing in my joy of my work, and all their work, of course, too. Before we get started, I want to just let you know about what's on your chairs. You have a bio sheet that tells you about everyone who's up here on the panel. You also have a program visitor survey. If you could take a minute to fill that out before you leave today, I'd really appreciate it. It's super helpful for us at MoAD to know who our audience is and also what impact the programs we're doing have on you. So please fill that out. And I also cannot forget to thank Kaiser Permanente. We're in our 5th year of the Chef in Residence program, and they have been our lead sponsor for all 5 years. We could not be doing this work without them. They really care about what we're doing. They love hearing about our programs. So just take a moment to thank Kaiser Permanente. Okay. That's fine, that's enough. Okay, so now I want to introduce to you Brian Terry. He is a chef, a cookbook author, an activist, and a generally amazing human being. Very lucky to know him. He has a new cookbook coming out called Vegetable Kingdom. It will be out on February 11th. You can already pre-order it. So do that as soon as we're done here. So please join me in welcoming the fabulous Brian Terry.
So when I say drink, you say rum. Drink rum. They're ready for this after party. I mean, okay, clearly this is everything, but after this, it's gonna be everything squared. So get ready. Thank you all for coming out. I know there are a lot of things you could have been doing today. I'm not gonna take up a lot of space, but I just want to say that one, thank you for being here. Thank you all for. I mean, look, I had this vision of what this panel would look like, but I was sure I wouldn't be able to get all these fabulous people in the room at the same time. So we did it, okay? All right. We did it. So 5 years ago, Linda Harrison, the former executive director, approached me about this Chef in Residence program that we would co-create. And this panel today is really in the spirit of what I've been doing since I started. The first program I did in the fall of 2015 was an event we had called Black Women, Food, and Power. And we brought together some scholars, cookbook authors, farmers, to really talk about the issues that, the historical role of Black women in the production, the consumption of both food and food knowledge. And, you know, for me, it was important. It's always been important to use my privilege and my platform in this space to create an opportunity for historically marginalized people to talk about the issues and to activate us to do something, right? I really want this to move beyond the heady and intellectual, and I hope that out of, you know, what comes out of this conversation and any of the events that I do is somehow moving you to be engaged, whether it's being engaged as a citizen, as a community member, as a consumer. We really need to think about how we can use our own privilege and power to transform the food system. Y'all ready? Are y'all with that?
Yes.
Are y'all ready for that too?
Yes.
So, you know, I've had a number of conversations with queer friends in the food industry, whether it's restaurants, whether it's catering, cookbook authors, academics, and, you know, so often I hear about the ways in which, you know, these issues of race and gender and sexuality have intersected in the food world. And I hear a lot of complaining, and, you know, I also hear a lot of complaining about these kind of tokenized spaces where folks are brought on to even panels. And it's not moving beyond just like this surface perfunctory diversity, and we aren't really digging into the issues around, like, I mean, forget about inclusion, we're talking about equity and a shift in power, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I wanted to create this space for my friends, because I know everyone up here and I've talked to some of them about these issues, and I just thought it was important to create this space for folks to really dig deeply. So without further ado, I'm gonna pass it over to Lee.
It is so lovely to see all your faces here, lots of friends and family folks, and then all other bright and shining people. So thank you all for being here to chat with us, and thank you all for coming from all the multitude of places that you arrived here from to have this conversation. Thank you, Brian, for pouring some drinks. I was like sitting and like calming myself, like we're gonna have this conversation. I'm like in my kind of like meditative space out there, and Brian was like, "But do you want to drink on that panel?" And I was like, "Yes, let's go." So I've got notes. We don't know where these conversations are gonna go today, but what I do want to say is that I have a bunch of questions, some things that we're gonna talk about that I want to invite our speakers here to engage with us around. We've had some pre-conversations to just kind of, for me to get a sense of like what's on their minds, what's going on in their work. But also this is going to be very emergent. I don't know where this is going. I'm inviting them to jump in. Yeah, exactly. No. I'm inviting them to jump in with the hoops and the hollers or the questions or whatever. Even though I'm sitting here in role of moderator, I hope this really can feel like a conversation and dialogue. And then there'll be a specific time towards the end in a kind of like normal format of a panel where you all as witnesses will also get to put your voices in the room in the form of questions, but also feel free to jump and shout or do whatever else you might need to do during our conversation.
Just don't hurt nobody.
Right. Mind your neighbors. So I want to start though just kind of in way of introduction. You all have their bios of these 4 really phenomenal folks in the field of food. So we're not going to go into bios, but kind of as a way of introduction and a way to just kind of warm up some conversation. I have a quick little question for you. Just can we hear about the last best meal you had? Who were you with and where were you? But like in like 30 seconds. I know y'all like in 30 seconds. This is a test, actually. Can you do it? But yeah, okay. You ready?
Am I on? I'm on. Last night, with my partner at home.
Also last night, at a burrito place, like hole in the wall, that was jam-packed with people. It was a cash-only place. Now, I believe in a cash-only place. And had that burrito, tore it up. Tore it up. And guess what? Here's the best part. I couldn't finish it, so I saved it for leftovers, and I had it for breakfast.
So, what on this? All right, so my last wonderful, remarkable meal was actually yesterday for lunch. It's because it involved a miracle element, an element of grace to get this meal to me. So I was in Austin yesterday presenting a seminar, and I don't know if you guys know the city, there's a spot called Franklin Barbecue that's notorious for a 4-hour wait. So naively, I show up around 10 o'clock thinking I'm gonna be done by noon. They're like, nah, it's gonna be like 1:30, and I'm like, my seminar's at 2, so I guess it's gonna be sad because I'm leaving tomorrow. And someone who was working there saw how disappointed I was and brought me barbecue to my seminar.
Nice one.
And I still have some left over for you guys. I want to spread the love, so it'll be even more special the second time around.
Thank you. Michael?
This is already too black for me.
Try it again.
Okay, this one.
Can y'all hear him?
No? Okay. How does this work? This is what I get for being a historical interpreter. I don't know anything about the 21st century. Yes. Cool, thank you, my sister. So yeah, it's so black to like have a discussion about food and while you're drinking, wait for the next meal, we talk about the last thing you had. The thing you're gonna eat after the next meal that you have after that. Very black. So I was with my friend, play sister Jasmine yesterday, who's proudly says she's an Oakland native and we went to the Sunset area to have Peking duck, and they said they had no Peking duck, they just ran out of it, and then lo and behold, gloriously, 3 Peking ducks emerged. So we was chowing down on, you know, the usuals, the pancakes, the green onion, the hoisin, the skin, and it was all good. Yes. 30 seconds? Not really, but okay.
That's all right. Thank you. Very good. Delicious. I love that we also had some themes emerge between leftovers and repurposing our meals. We've got sharing and gratitude and multiculturalism. We hit it all. That's the whole talk. Let's go home. But I also didn't actually tell you who everybody is. So let's do that, and then we'll jump into some more questions. So on the far end, we have Michael Twitty. Thank you for being here, Michael. Y'all can give him some love. And then next to Michael is Shannon Mustafer, and you are here by way of Austin, but based in New York.
Yeah, and I was in LA prior to going to Austin, and now I'm back in California.
Yeah,
4 days later.
These people are hustlers, so the fact that they could all be here on this stage right now really is an act of grace and a miracle, so thank you for being here. Great, and then Sarah Kiernan is next to Shannon, and she is our local representative, or at least she's based here at the moment, although really pulling from a wide range of cultures and backgrounds to be here, so thank you. And finally, Lazarus Lynch here. Okay, all right. I don't know if y'all can. Okay, now. And I don't know if you can see from there, but Lazarus is here, sparkling and shining and bringing all the glitter and gold. So thank you so much for being here from New York as well. And I am Lee Gaiman Jones, and excited to help guide this conversation. So I was really excited when Bryant invited me to facilitate this conversation, and when I saw the title of the talk, Black Queer Food, I was like, yes, I want that, I want to be a part of that, but also like, what are we talking about, and what does that really mean to us? And so I think I'd like to start, every question that comes up won't necessarily be one that everybody wants to engage with, but I'd love to hear from each of you just on this idea of how you relate to those terms, Black and queer, if at all. They're very specific terms as you think about those ideas. So how do you relate to the terms Black and queer? Does anybody feel like jumping that off?
All right now. Okay, so I'll try to keep this as short as possible, but I think what's interesting about this panel is we are all, I'm assuming from what we went over, cis-identifying. And with different definitions within that. Sure, great, I'll forget about that. Right? But also different labels of what it means to belong to the set of acronyms that we now loosely embrace but aren't all committed to. For me, queer means non-heteronormative. It doesn't have to be LGBT, it can be beyond that. Black is umbrella for everybody black, no matter where in the world you are. I'm proudly African American, I embrace that. I remind people that African American did not start with Jesse Jackson. It started in the 18th century, the first time it appeared in print, and we are proud, sovereign people.
Yes.
Like every other group, like the Garifuna, like Afro-Brazilians, like Afro-Haitians, we're our own people. But we've been blessed to absorb our cousins and our relatives as we've developed as a people. So we have those dual histories of being both part of the Black Atlantic, the African diaspora, and our own unique part of the Black world. When I was in UNC Asheville, someone asked, in this big crowd, someone asked the question, well, what's gay food? What do you mean? What makes food gay? And I said, what makes food straight? I said, y'all be eating oysters and chocolate and doing all this aphrodisiac nonsense. And when a man makes dinner for a woman in this kind of, patriarchal culture, that's supposed to be like special and, bridal gown winning behavior. So I said, there are all sorts of like genderisms and sexual cues around food that are heterosexual, heteronormative. But when it's us, you pretend not to notice. So Here's the 1.5 minute history of black gay people and food. We know that Molly Doma Sameh wrote in one of his books that he was ashamed of us as black people because we forgot that we've always had gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people in our midst, and they have been the shamans and the translators of spirit. He said, how could you look at Native Americans and admire them, but not acknowledge this is part of our culture before colonization? And he said, this is endemic to us. And so when I was growing up, I would read these things about how among the Wolof were one of my ethnic groups in my DNA, how they had a gendered class of men who were socialized like women, who were not only the best storytellers and dancers, but the best cooks. And then I was reading it about 10 or 11 years old, Gilberto Freire's book, The Masters and the Slaves, which was a sociological history of Brazilian culture. And he was one of the first people to say, you can't have Brazil without Africa. And the chapter about Africa, he goes on about the different influences in the cooking. There's one line got me, and he says, the best cooks are the homosexual black men. And everybody knows it, and everybody goes out of their way to have those folks there. And the reason why I bring this up is because black gay women and black gay men, same gender loving, queer, however you want to define yourself, we have always been these transmitters of culture and spirit and memory. And yet the accusation, homophobic, transphobic accusation from the outside world is, because we supposedly don't make children, which for black people is not really a reality for us. We're definitely involved in our families. We definitely have babies, raise other people's babies. We are somehow divorced from memory and history. And yet we've always been part of the griot class. So that's why I wanted to bring the whole history of, we've been there. I see black gay cooks in my work as a historical interpreter all the time, running away from enslavement in drag. Black gay women who were cooks in a big house, who were lovers running away in the Underground Railroad. We have a long and deep history, and I refuse to let anyone take it away from us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else about how you are relating to black and queer?
Well, how do you follow that up?
Somehow I imagine you might.
It's interesting. We had a pre-call to talk about some of these things that we're talking about now, and I think I said on the phone, I was like, I don't know people in my community, black people in my neighborhood, black people in my family who even understand what queer means. If I said I'm queer to my grandmother or aunt, it's like, huh, baby? What you mean you what? It's they don't identify. And I was like, black people in my community, in my world, don't understand what that word means. And so for a long time, I really struggled with not so much the terminology of queer, but in really owning and sitting in the space of who I am. And how does my sexuality inform that? So a little bit about me. I grew up in the Pentecostal church. All right. So for folks who don't know what that means as it relates to this topic, black, very accepted, very, very black. From the music to the way that you move your body to people falling out to the charismatic expressions of black people to the way that we dress and the way that we put our hair up, and Sunday morning is coming and you go to the barbershop the day before because you want to look your best and you dress in your Sunday's best, and the whole day is spent in church, eating in church, for another service after you eat, for another dinner after service. And at 10 o'clock at night, we'd roll home after being there from 8 o'clock in the morning. That was how I grew up. The black men in my life, I mostly understood to be straight. And the black men in the church were all different types of LGBT. But we didn't talk about it. Instead, we put a cloak of this this mask and this garment of, we're all the same in this building. And we can only talk about things as it relates to God or the church or the music. And I can have a gay choir director, which I've been. But we won't acknowledge that. We'll just acknowledge the fact that you bring something to the table, that you bring an offering, that you bring a service. And so for a long time, I had to dismiss I felt I had to dismiss my homosexuality, I had to dismiss my queerness in the name of being accepted, in the name of I'm bringing something to the table. And so as a cook, as someone who started in the food industry when I was about 12 years old, my father opened up a restaurant, I learned that you were to be seen and not heard. That the kitchen and the chefs that belong in the kitchen are to just be the ones who cook the food but never interact with the people who eat the food. And so again, it was that relationship of who I am doesn't matter to what I do. And I think that's the question that a lot of people have. Well, what does, as Michael said, what does this have to do with food? What does your being whoever you are have to do with the food? Well, it has everything to do with the food. You're the one that's creating it. You're the one that's cooking it. So for me, I had to really understand and accept and own that who I was, number one, it wasn't a problem. That I was not a problem. That has been and still is my journey in many ways. And I've come far, honey. I mean, you see all the sparkle. Come far, and I'm proud of it. And so, yeah, I think the expressions of what Black people do and our talents and our gifts were just assumed of us. I went to school with basically all white people. My elementary school was full of white people. But the Black kids, we would sing in harmony, we'd be in the hallway, stepping, y'all know what stepping is? Okay, we'd be stepping, we'd be making music, we'd be drawing on the walls, we'd be painting, and we were looked at as radical. We were looked at as children that don't know how to behave. So for my childhood, it's always been, it's been this interesting relationship of rechanneling who I am, the lens of how other people accept me or will accept me, and how do I navigate, how do I change, how do I fit in. And so breaking out of those barriers, I would say for the last 6 years, just really breaking out of those barriers and getting to define that for myself is very important. But we also, my generation, so I'm gonna just tell you how old I am because I know people are asking. I'm 25, I'm the baby on stage, all right? But having the history, having the Michael Twitties of the world, to sit down with my generation and to explain to us, no baby, drag didn't start with you. Drag didn't start on Instagram. It started in 1619.
Come on.
We go back. And so for me, I said this earlier too to Sarah, I said, I'm so honored to be part of this discussion. I said, because I feel I'm just learning. I'm just opening up to what is this conversation? What does it mean to be Black, queer, and in the food space? Who am I? And so asking all these kinds of questions, and I'm sure many of us are probably still asking. And so to be able to have this kind of conversation and to reflect is really an honor and a treat. Thank you.
So just ask me the question one more time.
How do you relate to Black and queer?
Okay. So for me, Black and queer is a new term that came into my life, I would say, in the last 20, 25 years. I was born in the UK, a small mining village in a town, outside of a town called Leicestershire. And then my parents sent my brother and I, who was also gay, back to Barbados to be raised by my maternal grandmother. And I don't remember really ever coming out living there. And I was there till I was 14, and then I went back over time. And I think that when I recant, when I realized was when the way that my family helped me. I was referred to sometimes as a boy and sometimes to a girl. When I was being taught how to cook by my grandmother, I was her girl. I was, the youngest daughter or the youngest granddaughter in the house who was learning how to cook. But when I was outside with my uncles, I was one of the boys. And my grandmother really saw that, or my family really saw that in my brother and I. And so, fast forward to us moving back to the UK, my brother and I really found it hard to identify what queer was or what gay was, because we didn't really grow up in a place where we had to announce that. And I think that that's part of just the historicalness of my family's relationship to spirituality, and just seeing that different people walk differently in the world. And my Blackness is just something is a badge of honor that I wear.
So for me, and I have to, frame this by saying that my father owned businesses growing up, and the messaging I received in my home and in my community, I grew up in Atlanta and Charleston, primarily in Atlanta, was that Black was empowerment. So mind you, this is in the 80s, and the mayor and the police chief and the fire chief and the bulk of the city council are African Americans. And I feel very blessed that I didn't, in my environment at least, look around and see anything that would indicate to me that being Black was, equal to being oppressed or being less than. I never received those messages. Mind you, this is balanced with an awareness of history. Like, we talk about Black history in my house all the time, and I knew what had taken place. We talked about slavery, we talked about discrimination. My family's from Charleston, and it is a real thing, and I've seen it, when I go back to visit. But for me, I just saw examples of how people of African American descent and Black people in America had done a lot of work. And I saw that in my father, so I always just thought being Black meant being talented, and it meant being accomplished, and it meant being an overcomer, and it meant being hardworking and entrepreneurial and creative and inventive. Like one of my first coloring books, I don't know if you guys know about this, but I went to RISD, so I studied painting prior to getting into the bar, was like the 100 Black history heroes. So it's like the brain surgeon and Harriet Tubman. Like I grew up with stuff like that, so I was like, being Black is great. In regards to being queer, okay, that's a fairly new term to me as well. I might look a little younger than I am. I called it drama-free diet, but I didn't really get acquainted with the term until I moved to Brooklyn about a decade ago. I came out when I was 15. I didn't even have to think about it because it was an integrity thing. It was like, oh wait, I'm gay? All right, well, I shouldn't be passing and lying and benefiting from this illusion. So I put the little rainbow thing on my backpack, and then was quickly, I started paying for it right away, but whatever. So in the South, I never heard the word queer. And in Brooklyn, you see it everywhere, and even to this day, it just seems like something that's constantly evolving, and I don't really know what that means, apart from being non-binary or non-heteronormative, which I think applies to me at times, but generally and overall, I don't subscribe to identity labels. Yeah, no, I'm an individual, and I like to be judged from that basis.
Great. Thank you all for those really rich responses. Having acclimated myself to California and California culture, I'm like, yes, I'm Black and I'm queer. And then when I was like reading into your bios and reading more about your work, I realized that may not translate. I'm also from Texas, and so that may not translate into terminology that you each identify with. And so I think it's helpful for us to know how we're relating to these terms that are holding the context of our conversation. I'm gonna stay with Blackness and queerness for a moment, and I'm curious about how you all see that unique intersection of Blackness and queerness fueling or supporting or guiding your work specifically. So you're working in food. How is Blackness and queerness coming together in your work in food?
So I think that for myself, having come from an art background and ending up working in restaurants and bars, and that was not something I anticipated or planned on initially. And I just think that I didn't see people who looked like me, and therefore there was no path or type of person to follow or no one to model myself after, so I got to create myself and my path from the ground up, which I think is an asset. I think some people see a lack of role models, and I'm doing the air quotes, as a problem, and maybe it is for some people. It depends on your personality. For me, it meant that I got to be who I wanted, how I wanted to be, and not think about comparisons, because I don't care really, but no, yeah, for me it's just like, just do what you want, because you are who you are, which is not like the people around you, which is fine, actually, which is great.
Great. How is Blackness and queerness coming together in other folks' work?
You know, what year is this?
2019.
I mean, it's for me, it's been how do I respond to the times? How do I, because my work is not just about cooking and serving meals or writing books or making music, although it all connects with what's going on with me internally. It's a place of deeper expression. We are living in toxic times. We are living in very dangerous times. It's really quiet in this room. And so, when I think about, when I go outside, I live in Jamaica, Queens, in New York. Predominantly middle class, some lower income. The other day I walked into one of the neighboring projects and I said hello to two guys who were sitting on the park benches, and they both silently looked at me, did not say anything back to me, then they looked at each other, and they looked back at me and they started to squint. Now for those of you who are like, what is he talking about? There's a silent kind of communication that exists within the black community amongst other black men. There's a this. Okay? That means, what's good? What's up? Okay? So the silent communication that I got was, you know him? Do you know him? And immediately I felt unsafe. Immediately I felt out of place. Now I showed up very gorgeous. I was gorgeous walking through that park. But I was afraid. Why was I afraid? Because I knew those two men represented for me within my own community. Because a lot of times we talk about the attacks that are coming from the outside to LGBTQIA. We talk about the external, but rarely do we talk about the internal challenges. The queer on trans bullying. You know, rarely do we talk about those things. So as it relates to my work, as it relates to what I post on social media, I know that my privilege as being a black queer man who has the understanding that who I am is more important than what someone else thinks is a form of privilege in itself. Because there's another young black boy, young black girl, who lives somewhere else who doesn't quite know that yet. And when they walk through the park, and when they walk into the grocery store, and when they walk into their classroom, and they get a look by a teacher, or they get a look by the principal, because this is what I went through. Or when there's a conversation that says the way that you dress, the way that you bring yourself to school is a distraction to the other students learning. Oh, these things happen. Who do they have to look up to? Who do they have to talk to? So as it relates to my work, you know, my work is fueled by the times. My work is fueled by what's happening in my neighborhood. It's informed by what's happening in politics. It's informed by what's happening in the country and in the world at large. And so it informs everything. It informs everything that I do.
I'm so glad we have similar life experiences. I know what it was. I was 16 when I came out in the school newspaper. And I remember that 15, 16-year-old, thing where you are the only one. I'm the only one, black, white, whatever, with the rainbow sticker on. And here you are repping for everybody. So we in that club together. We are proud people. The other aspect is that, I'm not a restaurant person. I'm one of those culinary outliers. And that has given me a lot of freedom, but it's also presented a lot of challenges. I remember going to the Roger Smith Cookbook Conference, and anybody who was anybody was there in the food world. New York Times folks, LA Times folks, people who had, multiple James Beard Awards. Now I count myself in that number, hey.
Yeah.
And I was nobody, and I was one of the few black males that was there, period. You could literally count us on, my grandmother used to have an expression about getting naked to count to 21. So, it's kind of like that. See, I knew there were some Southern people in this whole but, and being told, you can't come here with that black, Jewish, gay stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I'm black, I'm Jewish, and I'm gay. America is the only place where I'm possible. What the hell's wrong with you if you don't think that's okay? And then people telling you, no, it's too much, you're too complicated. You know what that Lazarus, with the too complicated stuff? And you can't be who you want to be and who you are. Just be our black author. Just be, oh yeah. The cooking gene, I was told on this big phone call with, a very well-known, very popular food book, cookbook publisher. America's not ready for you. You're too complicated. The Jewish thing is too much. Gay, middle America's not, they're not gonna accept that. I said, I've been accepting myself since I was 15 years old. They can catch up. And so when I'm in these, and on the other part of social media, we talked about this on the phone, how people come at you. More people come at me now as a grown-ass black man than they did when I was in high school, and the only person with that rainbow sticker on. Talking about Tariq Nasheed came after me big time. And it was like, you're fat, you're gay, you're black. Honey, those are facts, not reads. Note the difference. And I'm a bear too, woof. So there you go. Again, we're proud of people. What do you think I got all this plaid on? Shit? Anyways, being told, you ain't nothing but a fat, greasy slave holding biscuits. No, asshole. I am your ancestors. I'm in a gungun. I'm your ancestors come back to warn you about forgetting who you are.
That's right.
And you don't know that these men and these women were not suck-ups, they were not sycophants. They ran the show. They were revolutionaries in their space. And so what you want me to do is burn all of our history, forget all of that, and also erase those queer, SGL, and gay people in the past. And I won't do it. So I faced a lot of that prejudice on social media about my body, which really sucks. About, and then there are other sisters, well, they'll shout for Lizzo, but they won't shout for me. And I dig Lizzo because she's about her truth, but so the hell am I.
Right.
And it's just like, you face all these different layers of nonsense from people. Oh, soul food isn't very healthy. How could you perpetuate that? What are we talking about? You're Jewish? How did you become? No, we ain't talking about that no more. I taught over 1,000 kids in 15 years teaching Hebrew school. I'm more valid than Dan Woody Allen. Jeffrey Epstein, whoops. See you, Jeffrey. Notice I waved down. And as a gay person, I remember this. This was right after the night after James Beard. I was on the train at 3 o'clock in the morning, going from I didn't go to the parties. I went back to the hotel. I changed, took a nap, got on Amtrak, headed towards Williamsburg, Virginia, to do one of my programs. And I was on some bear or gay Facebook food group. And I remember this one brother who was Latino. He said, "I've been following your work. I'm so proud of you. It's making me cry that you've achieved this." And there were some white gay men on the same page who were like, "Why are you crying? What's that? What's so special about that? Who does he think he is? Why doesn't he thank anybody if he's got this accomplishment?" And I said at point blank, I said, "I am on a train in the middle of the night, wearing my medals to go portray enslaved people who built your damn country for free. Have some respect." I was told, you can't be political here. And I said, food is inherently political.
Yes.
And if you queens don't know that, change the title of your blog. But that's how I I want you to know something. I really value, first of all, I don't wear slave clothes. If you want to see what enslaved people who were really impoverished and extremely pained wore, we can talk about that. It's not the beautiful Williamsburg clothes I wear. Let's make that clear. This is for me another form of performative drag. Because for so long, culinary historians, historical interpreters, all the people who have the keys to the gates of public history were white people. So when I put on those clothes and I have the finest red velvet coat with the buttons, I'm not only enacting Robert the cook, who was a gay chef in Maryland, who apparently liked to roll his eyes at his white mistress. When she came in the kitchen, like, girl, bye. but I'm also proud because I'm like, it's my own way of becoming someone else, not only an ancestor, but the me before me, the me after me. I just wanted to put that in there.
That's good.
Thank you. So in your responses thus far, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Please.
How black and queer shows up in my work is how it shows up in me.
Yeah.
And right now, it's showing up that I'm sanctuary for people. The place I own, the place I work in, the place is my second home is sanctuary. It's sanctuary for people who are grieving, who are slowly dying, who are houseless, who are afraid. And so I'm showing up in this black female strong identity. And that's the times we're in. Do you know what I mean? And that's what right now me as a black queer woman is. That's how I have to be. I'm walking for a lot of people, not just my ancestors, but living folks who are in pain.
Right.
And so that's what my essence is, especially of this conversation, is that we're moving in different times now. So the queer part is real, but there's the overtone is that we're the ones who are showing up and doing the work as well.
I'm so glad you added that. Also, are y'all listening? They are saying the most beautiful things. I'm like taking notes, I'm taking notes like we're in school. Like I'm gonna come back to my notes and write an essay later. Maybe I will. I heard we are living in toxic times. We are living in dangerous times. I heard I'm a sanctuary. Many of you all are describing your work in ways that one could easily identify as both culinary and political. And I'm just curious, for those of you who resonate with that idea that your work is both culinary and political, what came first? What came first, and why did you choose the kitchen or culinary practices as your platform to kind of utilize your privilege?
My immediate response to that is I'm the granddaughter of a sugarcane plantation cook.
Yeah.
Her mother was the cook on a sugar plantation. Her mother was a sugar plantation cook. And so my platform is to show the power in what that was, you know? The having to code switch, you know? Coming home and cooking a particular type of way in the plantation house, and then coming home cooking cassava, steamed fish, cuckoo, you know, and just like, that's where I learned my strength from. And so that's the power to me in that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Politics or culinary, which came first?
Today, I think there's no way to separate it, but I think what came first for me was the food. Because I grew up, my grandmother was a housekeeper. She was a maid, and in Alabama, Bessemer, Alabama, and her mother was also a maid. And they worked for the good white folks, and making biscuits and chicken and gravy and all that. And so, and would come home, single parents, take care of my grandmother, this is my great-grandmother taking care of my grandmother, who was one of about 8 siblings. And when my father was born, it was just his mom and his 4 brothers and sisters. They all watched her cook, and they all watched her in the kitchen, and then moved to New York when my dad was about 6 years old. And I grew up watching my dad cook. My dad owned several businesses. Like Shannon, my dad was an entrepreneur. He did carpet. He build things. He was a construction worker, and then he opened the restaurant when I was about 12. So for me, food was about being with my dad. It was about family. It was about that kind of connection. And it wasn't until high school. I went to a school called Food and Finance High School in Manhattan. It exists. Food and Finance High School. It was amazing. It was a public school, and you had to apply to get in. And I got in, and so there was no audition, no test, no nothing. So I didn't quite accept my being gay at that time. I was very afraid to be out and come out. And there was a club in my high school for LGBT, I think it was just LGBT, there wasn't even a Q attached. It was LGBT, and I was afraid of that group. I was honestly afraid because they were so radical, they were political, and there were probably about 4 or 5 people. And I came from a very small high school. Now just to give you some context, small in New York is like 100 kids. To other people that's like, no, smalls in New York is like 400 kids. Okay, so other classes, other neighboring high schools had about 2,000 kids at least. So my high school was really, really small, but we shared a building with 6 other high schools. So, okay, we make up for it. We had to go through metal detectors every day. We had to, since post 9/11, we went through metal detectors, we had security left and right, and we still managed to get the weed in, through the back door. That's another conversation. So, whole other conversation. What was the question now? Right. So, I never thought, I always looked at that group, at that club in school as being, really bold. I thought these kids are bold, they're brave, they're owning their identity. And I would have friends left and right, I call them my friends, left and right saying, so, are you gay? And I'd be like, no, I'm not. And so, again, that self-denial thing, that part of you that you practice not loving yourself. And that manifests in how you show up in the world. It manifests in everything that you do, in the person that you are, and the energy that you bring. So it took me a long time to accept it. And then once I accepted who I was probably in the middle of college at some point. I had like 2 boyfriends and a girlfriend. And if you're listening, hi. Fun times. Those were fun times. But that was me exploring me. That was me opening up to me. That was the first time I felt permission to explore, ask questions, and maybe not get answers, but just ask the questions. And so now I'm totally just who I am, and I put a cookbook out in June, and the reporters, the journalists, the folks interviewing me are like, so your work is very political. So your work is very queer. Tell me why. And I go, what? I don't know what you're talking about. And then you're live on NPR. So you gotta say something. And so, I usually start off with saying something like, wow, that's a really interesting observation. And then I talk about whatever I want to talk about, because it's my time. So, I never, not until recently, I was sharing this with you today, I said, this is a very new kind of conversation for me, because I'm so used to being in my own little bubble, doing my own little thing, posting whatever I want to post, writing the book that I want to write, and again, that sounds like privilege to me. But then I walk into a space where folks are asking me questions because they're analyzing, they're on the receiving end of my work. And so I understand that it is an energy, and it's creating a response. The last thing I will say, now this is a little bit of a pivot, but Pride time is you know what, y'all, we need our Pride Month, but when it comes to Pride for me and my work, it's just the time I want to run away. Suddenly, you're relevant. Suddenly, you should be hosting 10 events, and suddenly people want to talk about you. And to Brian's point about the tokenization piece, I want to be like, hell no. I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that, because where were you in March? Where were you in April? And so part of the challenge I think that we all face is being a representative in our community, being the voice in our community. The way that we show up in the world allows us this huge, enormous platform and responsibility. But it's also challenging to some degree to have someone else tell you when that conversation is most appropriate. So I don't want to talk about being Black and gay and why that's important in June. Because I'm talking about it January 1, 2019, and you were nowhere to be found. Or you were to be found saying something insulting or clicking unfollow. So there's some mixed messaging here. And the other thing is, we talk about equality, we talk about representation. Well, pay me what you owe me. You know?
And we're done.
That's the thing. You know, you wanna pay me no money to be part of your event, but you wanna say that you're doing a service to my community by hosting an event for us, that ought to be enough. And so where's the pay me what you owe me, respect, invest what put your money where your mouth is. If you want people to show up, if you want to be, and these brands, and I love them, and I know they're going to be listening, but that's all right, because God's going to take care of me anyway. But these brands who want to do all these campaigns, I got an offer from a really big brand to do a Pride campaign for, I'm going to tell you the amount. You ready? Well, this is interesting. I got the invitation to do it. They really lowballed my managers. They said, oh, he's gonna, for about $2,500, we'll do the campaign. 2500. My manager said, Liza will do this no less than $60K. They came back and said, okay, we've decided to pull in another direction. But they really needed a Black boy in their campaign. So they turned around and said, okay, we'll do the $60K. Now, let me tell you what happened. Oh, this is a good story. They came back and said, we'll do it for $60K. And we said, okay, let's get a contract. And about a week later, they said, we decided to move on. So now here's my thing. I'm not complaining, the money aside. It's the fact that the brand did not respect you enough in the beginning to offer you what they were offering Kendall Jenner on the same campaign. They want to put me next to another person who's that, but you don't want to meet me there. So for me, it's like there's a level of, and I have white management, and I've been attacked by the Black community for having white managers. I have. Because what do they know about, what does a cis, white man know about being Black and gay, and how can he best, advocate for you? So I've gotten a lot of pushback for that. But the other side of the coin is that we have to be able to own our value. We have to be able to know that. We have to be able to advocate on behalf of that and not be afraid to say no in the name of doing good. It's like, oh, you want me to talk to, this is a good thing? Look, I'll go live on Instagram and talk to my audience and talk to, 134,000 people. That's what I'll do. So that's the interesting dilemma that I face in my work.
Okay, thank you. If anybody else wants to respond to that, that's an open question. I'm gonna take us in a slightly different direction though, and so you all obviously will just take what I say and go wherever you want to with it. No shade, who said shade? No shade. The next thing I'm really curious about kind of came up, bubbled up in a few things that you all said, and I think in particular, Lazarus, you were talking about what happens within our own communities, and I'm thinking about your work, Michael, and your reference to different feedback and responses you've gotten, and beyond people just being obnoxious and absurd on social media. I know that some people have experienced your work and your performances, and Black people in particular, and have come away with or given you responses that are based in their own shame. Their own shame, or some response about, why would you represent Black people in this way? And I'm curious how other folks, we could start with you, Michael, but how people are engaging with their own communities and the responses of their communities to their work, which hopefully aren't only shame responses, but how are you engaging with your communities around your work?
So the first thing, the opposite of the shaming is rooting. So one of the things that, I'm proud that as soon as I went to Africa, I said, okay, you know what? It's now my obligation to have everybody else have the same feeling I had. So we're going on our third culinary pilgrimage to West Africa, taking Black chefs, Caribbean, Latinx, and African American to the continent. That's been the first time. And now we have the group that originally went, plus the new folks, because they want to go back. But now we're working on a documentary. It's on my Instagram, The Cooking Gene, the teaser. My friend and genius Casey Wright, One Woman Army, took camera, boom, everything else with her to Benin. And basically, it's amazing footage of us learning from our cousins, working with our cousins, cooking with our cousins. And so for me, it's about, okay, look, this is about preventing amnesia, and also about creating, bridges. There's no shame in this. When I first started, I'd be at some museum or some place giving a lecture, and our elders were always represented, and then some folks in the middle would kind of hover in the back of the room, where they could get away really fast, and they would run. They couldn't take it. It didn't matter the fact that I was talking about empowerment or resistance, or how free people of color built on the capital of being caterers, restaurateurs, tavern owners, etc. They weren't there for it. Now, they'd come to a plantation, but they wouldn't come to that space to, this is weird to me. But it's about rooting. It's about going to culinary schools where people are students and saying you have an obligation to know your own history despite the fact the school's not teaching you. Right. And you do the same thing that was done in the late 60s and early 70s, which is advocate for Black content in culinary educational spaces. Yes. Because they teach about the Caribbean and about South America just barely, and never mention Africa or the Africans. They talk about the South, but never talk about the connection between the South and the rest of the Afro-Atlantic world and Africa. And they don't talk about Black food personalities going back centuries, of the fact that you wouldn't even be eating if a Black woman in East Africa hadn't been born Homo sapiens. So let's start with there. So, it's just about encouraging people to be rooted in our culture, be rooted in our history, to take people to the continent, to take people to those plantations and sites of enslavement and liberation, to encourage us to figure out, to go talk to our aunties and our grandmothers and our grandfathers and our dads and our moms while we still have the time, and our neighbors. Just a quick plug. There are all these neighbors and friends and people in houses of worship. Get their stories. It doesn't matter if you're blood connected to them or not. Get their stories, talk to them. They're lonely. They want to be heard. Talking about food narratives often brings some of our elders back into a mental space where they're back with loved ones. And not only are you doing the future a favor and the present a favor, but you're also, like Sarah said, caretaking, giving people a space to survive beyond just survival. And so that's so critical. So for me, it's moving beyond just responding to negativity and just doing something about it and just saying, okay, I'm gonna own this. You know, so when people say to me nonsense, I'm like, how many people did you take to Africa this week, this month? How many kids have you encouraged? Did you buy a box of your books and send them to a prison so that our brothers and sisters in jail could read and have something to do and talk about these things? What have you, so for me, it's like water off a duck's back. It's just do the positive work, create karmic justice, and the rest is gonna be will be fun for you.
Thank you. Shannon, you had a particularly interesting and I think exciting way of rooting in if we think about the African diaspora and thinking about your work in kind of centering around the Caribbean, and as we drink this lovely cocktail, which I don't know if this was your creation.
For better or worse, and you will experience this later on.
They're good, let me tell you. They're good. I'm just curious, like what sent you on that journey to rooting in the Caribbean as you were developing this line of work around women who tiki?
Sure, so I like to say that a lot of the better things that have happened in my life were, I wasn't smart enough to choose them. But when the opportunities present themselves, I'm smart enough to fully exploit them. So that's, thank goodness for that much. 5 years ago, I was running the bar at Gladys before it became Gladys Caribbean. So for those of you who may be less familiar, I run a bar in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, which is historically populated by various Caribbean American populations and communities. I am not Caribbean, just to clarify. My family's from Charleston, we're a Geechee Gullah. So for those who are familiar with the history of Charleston, it was founded by people, or rather by planters from Barbados after they ran out of space for plantations. So Barbados was one of the biggest sugar growing areas in the Caribbean relative to its size. Between 1680 and 1710, for instance, they recorded the number of sugar mills and plantations growing, or rather exploding, from 50 to 800.
Wow.
So the scale of sugar production there was huge, and when they ran out of space, Charleston was the next point of landing to start that industry. So that being said, I don't know if any of you have ever visited Charleston, but people who are from the Low Country can speak in the patois that people think is Caribbean. Like, people ask my dad, they're like, "Are you from Jamaica?" No, not from Jamaica. I don't have the accent, as I grew up moving back and forth between Atlanta and Charleston. I could always hear the accent where I was, so I never picked one up. But when I found myself in a position to run this program at Gladys, I did feel some connection to the food. I grew up eating rice every day. I grew up eating different stewed greens and seafood. So I felt like an affinity. So I don't want to overstate that element, but I thought that I was close enough to it to want to pay homage to that culture. But what really, and I'm digressing, but I just want to set the stage for you. What really fascinated me was rum as a category, which at that time, 5 years ago, was not well represented in the bar space or in the hospitality space. A lot of consumers, especially in New York, still don't have a lot of familiarity with rum, and it just doesn't have a great reputation. I'm talking like from a mixology standpoint, or from a consumer standpoint. And when I was setting up the bar, I had a month to put together a back bar of 50 rums that had to meet my criteria of being sippable neat or good in a cocktail, and you'd be surprised that there aren't that many rums that fit the criteria. I think I tasted 250 or 300. I was really dedicated to this task. I was like, I'm gonna get this rum. So I was there every day. I think they found me asleep in there one night. My roommate was teasing me because I had a really big wall in my apartment at the time, high ceilings. And I covered it with Post-it notes because I was trying to develop a flavor genealogy of rum and rum cocktails, and I just really wanted to make a program that would show the best of that spirit category and revive interest in it. And then as I learned more about how related to the production of sugar and colonization. I saw an opportunity there to create a program that could talk about those cultures and talk about what people had to go through in order for this industry to come about, and how that in turn funded every other industry that we have to kind of create our modern economy. Like all the money for the American economy, for our modern economy, the global economy is derived from sugar.
Tell us about it.
All of it. Okay, so I could go on for a while. You have a few minutes? Okay, but you know, in my research, like learning about sugar, I realized like Barbados is one example. That's one small island. If you look at what took place in Brazil, that's times 10. Jamaica is not, you know, their production was almost like 3 times as big as Barbados, even though the land is not that big because it's a really fertile area. It was crazy. Like the amount of money that was coming out of this industry was akin to the gold rush, and then later the oil boom, and now Silicon Valley. So there had been no historical precedent up until this time for that amount of revenue coming out of one industry in that short amount of time. And something people don't talk about. And so it wasn't just like, ooh, yeah, these drinks good. It was like, hey, if I offered a flight to someone, I'd be like, hey, I want to talk to you a little bit. It depended on the guest. I'm not going to give a history lesson to anyone, everybody. But, you know, with my staff, we would have moments where we would have rum at the end of the shift. It wasn't just like, yay, we finished. And it'd be like, guys, I need us all to kind of be quiet for a minute, because there's a really high price that we pay for this. And by we, I'm talking about we. And so we would pour a little on the side as a libation to honor. So I didn't see an opportunity to talk about history with another spirit category. And I think that's why I felt so passionate about creating a program that was high quality, not just from like a cocktail standpoint, but like, this is a story you can't eat. This is a really unique opportunity. So I feel I'm going crazy with it, but that.
No, we love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sarah, as our one representative in this group that is based in the Bay, and specifically the one of us who's also running their own brick and mortar operation, I want to. You already love it, right? So I'm curious. Also doing that in a city that is one of the, if not the most expensive city in the country, I'm just really curious about what are the questions you're chewing on right now, and I want to ask you, because this is where we are, and let's like talk about the place that we're in. But we have Lazarus and Shannon also in New York, and with Michael in DC. The issue of gentrification and rising cost of living, et cetera, is one that is kind of plaguing us all. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of the questions you're chewing on?
Well, I'm just going to say this. I learned
Yeah.
yesterday that New York City is built upon sugar money.
Wow.
Most of the banking and the financial industry is sugar
And
money.
most of the Ivy League institutions as
Oh,
well.
totally.
Most of them.
So that kind of lends itself to the question you just asked me in thinking about what does it mean to be in the Bay now. I moved here 21 years ago, where it looked a lot different. And I worked primarily in the Mission. I lived in a room with several other people. I was paying $250 a month, and it was, you know, the times were good, you know. And I was working I went from an Italian restaurant to a Southern restaurant, and the demographics started to change. The audience started to change. And we had an open kitchen in the last restaurant I worked at in San Francisco, and there was just a lot of non-Black people relating their stories of growing up in the South to me, and relating their history of biscuits and fried chicken, and it just got to where I couldn't do it anymore.
Welcome to my world.
And I didn't want, right, you know, and so then that also came from other folks, and you know, because I present as a Black person, so that definitely means African American, you know. And so I decided that it was time for me to move to Oakland.
Fair.
And that was in the mid-2000s, and I was still commuting back and forth, and then I gave it up and opened up a restaurant that was part of a nightclub scene in Oakland. And those were good times for a moment, and then they turned really sour really quickly. Because people got greedy, and that's when the greed started to happen, when folks were coming from San Francisco and taking spots in Oakland. And these were supposedly our allies. These are people we cooked with, danced with, you know, who were throwing parties with each other, and they had money and we didn't, or they had access to funds that we didn't have access to.
Right.
And so it got to a critical point where I left work like literally with skillets and knives. And I was like that black woman walking out the door. And a friend of Brian's, I actually texted and I said, I need you to come and pick me up before I hurt somebody.
Okay.
It was that kind of
You gotta call your
conversation.
people.
Yeah. And so that came out of that came my restaurant, because I could just hear my grandmother just going, really? Is this what you're doing? And it took me a year to like find myself again. and then Miss Ollie's was born. And it was born out of a place of, because like really they're not, I didn't know that many West Indians in the Bay. So who was I appealing to? And I think what was appealing, or what I felt would be appealing, would be, I grew up with this term my grandma would say, she's always cooking for the road. And it meant that you never know who's gonna come by and have a meal, or needs a meal, or wants a meal.
It's a good book title.
Oh, thank you. And I mean, now what it looks like now is that the restaurant opened up as a restaurant. We had table service, and now we've just become counter service. And now we're having conversations with other folks who can't afford to pay for food. We're feeding other people. We're lending ourselves to other situations. And so that cooking for the road has like kind of morphed into really what my grandmother was doing, which is, once again, you keep coming back to, is caretaking. Do you know what I mean? And so my restaurant came out of trying to be that community. As melanated people, we need to go back to being community-minded. We need to work together as a team.
Yes.
You know, and this individual platforms, they don't exist in our culture. Do you know what I mean? So I believe that fast forward 2019, 2020, Miss Ollie's will look a lot different. I can't say what it will look like, but it will look a lot different, because having a brick and mortar, when there's folks with billions and millions of dollars coming to Oakland and building restaurants and making bars and having great programs and having great food stores, that doesn't mean anything anymore. That's just what they're able to do because they have access to funds. We're holding on for dear life, and that's gonna evolve, and that's gonna turn into something amazing and beautiful.
That's beautiful. You know, I think I was a little scarred because my father and mother had a restaurant for 12 years. And I think I got a little burned on the edges and thought, I will never do that. Never open up a space. Recently, someone asked me, I said, you know, this is always a challenge of describing what you do in the world. It's like, what do you do? And I said, well, and I always think, like, who am I talking to? I have to evaluate, you know. So I go, I'm a chef. And you know the next question. Where is your restaurant? Where do you cook? And I go, well, I don't have a restaurant. And then you have to go down the whole journey. So anyway, she said, well, would you ever consider opening up a restaurant? And I said, no, absolutely not. And then she said, well, never say never. Never say never. And I said, you know what? For the first time, I'm gonna take that. I'm not gonna say no, because maybe that could happen one day. I am doing this really cool partnership now with a company called Fresh & Co. They're based in New York City, where they wanted me to come on as a partner and create their fall menu. And I said yes to that. And, you know, I created a sandwich and a salad bowl. It's very like quick eatery, cafeteria style. And when we got there, we were there to promote it. My team, we were like, this is exciting, this is great, but people have to be able to afford it. It's $10 for the salad, and it's $10 for the sandwich. Now, it's not a lot of money, right? For most people can afford that. But we were thinking about the kids who are going to the bodega because they have $5, and they're buying a bag of potato chips and a can of soda. And so it challenged all of us to start thinking about what could we do to make it more accessible, to make fresh food more accessible to my generation, and for kids who are at risk. So although I live in New York and I've lived there for all my life and have seen all kinds of changes and, you know, this one coming in and tearing it down and tearing down all the mom and pops, and my mother and father were mom and pop owners, it's like right now, that conversation can be talked about with people who can do that and can care about that work. What I care about talking about are those kids, those black and brown kids, who are coming in from Crown Heights, who are coming in from Jamaica, Queens, who are coming in from the Bronx, who are coming in from Harlem, and who don't even know how to make scrambled eggs, who don't understand the differences between an olive oil, a canola oil, a vegetable oil, and why that's important. Why do you use certain fats when you're creating certain things? So for me, it's about bringing the information and also bringing food in a way that it's accessible to younger people. You know, so I've been invited, and I'm doing this now, you know, where I'm going to at-risk schools, teaching cooking classes. There's one school that I'm going to go to, it's in Brooklyn. It's an all-boys school, and these kids are at risk. Some of them have served and did juvenile and have done time. And many of them are questioning identity. Many of them not only about sexuality, but all kinds of identity issues, who have not known where their families are or have been displaced or who have been homeless at one point. So that's what I care about talking about. That's what I care about making, you know, improving upon the world is meeting those people. You know, that's what I care about, and that's what I'm doing these days.
Thank you. Are y'all itching with questions? Are you just like dying to get into this conversation? I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up for you all. So I'm not going to ask one of my questions that I was really excited about for the sake of time, and I'm also going to do a little time bending right now. So I'm not going to make eye contact with Bryant and Elizabeth because I'm changing the program slightly. But I do want to at least say some of the things that were coming out. Okay, great, thank you. Some of the things that were coming out in what you all said today, as well as in my preliminary research into your work. I just want to kind of put some of those words out there before we move into a couple of final thoughts and then questions. So one that feels really resonant for me in your work collectively is resistance, also resilience, and also innovation. I also heard caretaking. There's a lot of reference to ancestors, lineage, agungun, calling on people's names, calling on your lineage, and I just want to appreciate that I feel like is what is binding your work together and something that we can all hold with us as we continue to sit with your work. I want to take a minute to dream. So from each of your kind of unique, special, and powerful vantage points, I'm curious about what do you see next? And I can be more specific. I want to leave it like really open. What do you see next? But if that's just like obnoxiously open, then I can say, what do you see next in the field of food? Or what do we need? What do you want to see? And so maybe just like a quick, back similar to our opening, a nice short response to that while folks start to gather and form the questions for our Q&A. Anybody want to kick it off?
We just need less waste. I mean, we need a lot of things, but one of the biggest problems in hospitality and food service and the way we produce and serve, and there's so much food and everything thrown away, so much waste. Like that's at the top of my mind anytime I go into a restaurant or when I consume or when I'm working out a cocktail program or like how am I going to execute this event? Like how can I do this with without throwing things away? Because it just seems like something we don't bat an eyelash at in this industry. Like, you guys look around, like look at any grocery store, any Whole Foods, they're always throwing stuff away. It's ridiculous. I think that's a glaring thing that just needs to stop. And I think there's a lot of business opportunity for people that want to innovate in that field in terms of opportunities to eliminate that and to create a business.
Where do I see myself going? What's next for me?
Sure. For you, for the world, you know, whatever.
As a new citizen. No. For me, it's about really, I went to Benin this year as well. I wasn't part of your trip, but I followed in his footsteps, you could say. And I grew up in the Caribbean. And for me, the next journey is definitely more about tying all those pieces together spiritually. I am clearly a healer through food, and the next level for me is getting in touch with that, with plants and more plant-based items and travel and time travel and shifting in a way that I can contribute to spiritually changing the world. And so I'm opening myself up to a place where I've never done that before, but because I've always had a job, or I've always worked. And now I'm entering this place where I'm allowing the universe to tell me and guide me to what needs to be done.
Yeah, I'll give you the last word, Twiggy. It's so interesting because as you talk, I feel the healing. Do you all feel that? Yes. It's just like that's real. That's your gift. That's your gift. It's beautiful. Yeah, there's so much work to do. There's so much change that needs to happen, and I always appreciate conversations like this. That it ought to make us all go look in the mirror and think, what could I do? Even if I'm not a chef or I don't have a whatever, but where you are in your own life, what could you do to make a difference? I know we say that all the time. We talk about it. It's so cliche, but these kinds of conversations, they should be that kind of transformational for all of us. And for me, it's also approaching my work from a very spiritual place too. Mental health illness in this country is on the rise. Depression, anxiety, and I'm not talking, even adults. I'm talking about young children who have anxiety because they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. Do you know what kind of anxiety that produces in a child? Where they have to sit in class and wonder, is it going to be safe to get on that train and get home? Or it's going to take me 2 hours in New York City to get from Manhattan to the Bronx where I live, or to Queens where I live. And all those kinds of anxieties. So for me, I think my dream right now, and I'm working on this, is creating a platform where people who look different, sound different, we're all different at a table, can all sit down over a meal and talk and open up and discuss and allow that conversation to be heard and engaged from people all around the world. So that's something that I'm excited and I'm working on that. Yeah.
So it's really hard for me as someone who has 2 feet and 2 hands in the past to think about the future. Because for us, history and identity is an effort of search and recovery.
Yeah.
We're always in disaster mode. We're always on the move. I didn't talk about the gentrification question, but my own city, we now have a revolution called Don't Mute DC. As before, we were just becoming chocolate to mocha to nothing. And people ask me where I'm from, and I claim the DMV and I claim DC, but I just say we're a migration people. All of us. We move wherever we can thrive for a moment, then we move on. And that's just the nature of who we are. So for me, I think one of the biggest things that I want to do, not anytime soon, but definitely in my elderhood, is work towards creating a folk school where I can teach and have other people teach these traditions. I tell our younger people, this is 42, Safa, that you have to see yourself as if you are the last ones. That everything will, I'm working on an essay right now called The Last Negro. And it's about all these folks now who don't want to even touch that history. And like, what you gonna do when the last person dies who was born Negro on paper? You're gonna lose a lot of fight in that generation. You lose a lot of history in that heritage of resistance. You think you're giving up shame? No. You're giving up the tools. So what happens when it's the last black millennial, the last black Gen Xer? You know, how much further are we gonna go from our point of losing it all? So that's a big thing for me. And the other thing is just making sure we're connected, getting our family to talk to each other, to learn from each other, to encourage people to not take for granted our labels, to work within change. We have a serious racism problem in the gay community, and some of us face it more than others. I am not completely 2 feet in the black gay community. Well, we did have a beautiful organized one in DC once upon a time. We still had buildings and neighborhoods, but I'm not totally rooted in that. And the fact that I'm not means that that story I gave earlier is just the tip of the iceberg of what I encounter. And it's also misogyny and other issues within the gay community. We have to rein the hell in because we cannot survive that way, especially people of color. It just keeps on going. So it's like doing that internal homework in ourselves, in our households, in our communities that is so important, I think is like the other area. And last but not least, we need to continually represent. Cooking Gene was all about the fact that African American people and our Caribbean and Latin cousins did not have a reference point for someone telling their story, telling their food story through our own history. Kosher Soul, which is next, is about me being Jewish and the fact that Jews of color were not jokes. We've been there since Moses and Zipporah, and we're going to still be here. And then the last part is about being gay in the kitchen, because I was literally told at that cookbook conference, you don't exist. And the thing that got me was, I sat in that chair and had an epiphany going, just like Chef Lazarus was talking about, what about the next person who is different? What if they can't see themselves and they don't even try? And therefore the world can keep on saying you're erased, you don't exist, America's not ready for you. So for me, it hasn't been about cookbooks. It's been about creating quality nonfiction memoir, food memoir, where we aren't just white women, because that's who the majority of my colleagues are. And God bless them, bless their hearts. My future husband came from a white woman, so no shade. But like, we need to be able to keep it going in all of our work as urban farmers, as bartenders, as mixologists, as chefs, as food writers. Keep that diversity going and representation going, so no one can erase us again.
All right, so we're gonna open it up for some questions for about 20 minutes, and I will just see you or call you all out as I see you, and we'll go from there. So I have somebody in the front, and can you speak nice and loud and maybe also share your name with us?
My name is Jasmine, and I want to start by acknowledging that I was late, so when I arrive at my question, if y'all already answered this, feel free to give me a collective. We already answered that.
We already answered it, but
as a queer black woman, I understand being in this space where you're constantly being forced to prioritize one of those intersections over the other. And for me, it always arrives at being black. That has to be like my #1 priority at all times. Before I'm queer, before I'm a woman, I have to represent black. And I'm just gonna be like 100. I feel like this panel very much represented that feeling. I heard a lot of talk about black. I heard a little talk about queer. I resonated with Shannon talking about sugar because it's the way that I approach food history. It's my story, it connects to everything. You can tell the entire human story through food. And that's how I've been able to discover my own identity, is like finding an ingredient and finding all the stories connected to it. And so I wanted an opportunity, if you guys could, if you have a specific queer story, like my ancestry is super important, like the African connection is super important. I'm not saying it's lesser than. here I am explaining those intersections, but like a specific story that you've been able to uncover that is specifically related to that queer identity, whether it was the queer person cooking in the kitchen on the plantation, or a queer woman that did something, whether it was a woman that passed as a man to move through, you know, society in the culinary world for that position in whatever. A food story that you guys have found along the way that helps you express who you are through culinary, blah, 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 fill in the blanks.
Will you say your name one more time?
Jasmine.
Jasmine,
Uh-huh.
thank you so much for that question. I really appreciate it, and I'm gonna obviously invite you all to respond, but also give you a minute to think while I just say something really quickly, which is that I think that it was a really astute observation about where the conversation went, and it's very much a reflection of my kind of hierarchy of identity, if there is one, and it is also probably very much aligned with what you described. And so the questions, I think, really followed that, and I'm really grateful that we'll get this opportunity to specifically really dive into a question of queerness. So thank you so much for that.
So I'm going to tell a personal story about being in high school. So as I mentioned, I went to a school called Food and Finance High School in Manhattan, New York, and there was a teacher there who I didn't know their identity, but I felt so connected with them. They were one of my culinary instructors, and we bumped heads a lot too, because they were the teacher, and I also thought that, you know, I had some important things to say. I didn't know how to keep my mouth shut. I had a lot of opinions, but through the years, you know, as I became more open about my sexuality and just opened up to myself and to my friends and family, I later got in touch with this teacher, and we met a couple times and saw them at, you know, school events, and one time we had lunch together, and they had mentioned their partner, and I said, "Yo, who?" And I was like, "Oh my God, now I get it. Now I understand. Now I understand why I felt connected to you. I understand why I would always ask you for questions and ask you for guidance out of all the other teachers here, why I felt always pushed by you and also challenged from you." I think that particular teacher wanted to keep a respectful, wanted to keep a professional line between their personal lives and who they were in the kitchen. But what I learned by being a student there and by watching that teacher is that he saw the real me. He saw the me that I couldn't see. He saw the me that I probably was afraid to see, and was able to, through food and through connecting me to ingredients, and I mean, even showing me how to hold a knife, that was, in his own way, giving me the lesson that freed him, which was that through food, you know, you can connect with a deeper part of who you are. And so that transformed me, and that changed everything for me, because I thought, oh my God, here's a teacher who really understands me. But in the kitchen, it wasn't about me being gay. It was about me being my best. And so I will forever be grateful for that.
Anyone else want to respond before we take more questions?
I think that for me, a lot of sort of like the practice was the kitchen table. Under my grandmother's regime, the kitchen table was the island of safety. And it was, I found that when I've talked to a lot of other, particularly Black gay men, the grandmother's kitchen table comes up a lot as like this refuge from, you know, meanness, you know, that don't nobody hurt my baby thing is real. And that kitchen window and that whole kitchen table thing is very real. The other part of it is that my mother and I, of blessed memory, were very close in the kitchen. And then the kitchen table is where I came out. It was also a very painful space for me too. But it was also a space where, you know, later on, when I began to form LGBT family, we had an event every year in my area when I was yet a youngin' called Anti-Thanksgiving. And it was always held the day after Thanksgiving, because that's, you know, one of the horror dates at the gay calendar. And we would, you know, come together. The rule was we were tired of Thanksgiving food and leftovers, so we had to make something totally new. And everybody had to bring something of a different color in the liberation flag. And we have Margaret Cho playing, and we would, pre-RuPaul, have RuPaul CD playing, and all that other nonsense, and just have celebrate, our diverse queer heroes, and just have a space where we could have dinner and cook for each other out of our different cultural backgrounds, but also represent all the fullness that rainbow flag had to offer. And so I found that this food was, it was a tool of being able to connect with other people and keep a family structure going, even when you didn't feel connected to your own family because of that rejection for being gay.
I don't know what it's like in California. New York has changed dramatically over the last 15 years that I've lived there. But I have to say, for me, part of coming of age as queer is the gay bar, or the gay and lesbian bar, which is virtually extinct in NYC. I don't know anyone who's been there late, but there are no lesbian bars anymore, right? But when I was younger, I'm not going to date myself, if I wanted to go out and be in a hospitality space that was welcoming and where people were overtly out or a queer or a lesbian, it had to be one of those very specific kind of spaces. Some people have mixed feelings about the demise of those spaces because they say, well, we need our spaces, and I'm like, well, maybe we don't need them the way we used to need them. And so now you'll see restaurants like Mimi's Diner, which is really cute. You can follow on Instagram, where everyone that owns and works in the restaurant for the most part is queer, and there's a woman who runs the kitchen, and there are two gentlemen who are queer who run the front. I think we're starting to see more visibility in restaurants where people are saying up front that being queer is influential in how they run the space or why they're there as a community meeting point. But yeah, I didn't really have a lot of influences when I was getting started, or anyone to really look to or look at. Just spaces where I can meet people who are like me and feel safe and feel like I could be open. But yeah, that was pretty much it.
Okay, thank you all. Another question in the back. Yes.
Hi, my name is Savannah. Thank you so much for this gift, for this panel. Each one of you really has awakened something in me. I have a question. I'm an anthropologist and actually teach a Black queer culture class. And a lot of what I think about is about Black people as queer people are always being consumed, right? So I try to stop thinking about not just what do Black queerness look like out there to consume it, but what do we see like? Like what's the lens of Black queerness kind of looking out? And so I feel like the Black queer food, it could be like, oh, what does Black queerness taste like on a plate to be consumed? I wonder on the flip side, what's a Black queer palate? And what does Black queerness taste? You know what I'm saying? Like how we receive the world from a visceral sense.
Yeah, my sister. Come on, y'all.
Okay, I have to get this one real fast. Okay, so I have to get in this one real fast because there's a saying amongst myself, my cousins, my sisters, we're really sassy. I don't know if you ever been to the Low Country, people can be a little sassy, right? So it's like, they want our flavor, honey. It's like, and by they, we talk about people who are not within our community, right? It's like people want our fashion sense, they want our style, they want our way of speaking, dancing, moving. They want to experience life the way that we do, like the color and the verb and the creativity. So, can I answer the question, is there a particular way that as a Black queer person I taste things? I think it just varies person to person. I know that my way of tasting things is rather funky and offbeat. I was, giving a book talk, and one of the comments was like, yeah, I was looking at this recipe and it just looks really strange. And I'm like, good. And it's just like, but when I made the drink, it was delicious. And I was like, great. Okay, so I think that, and we talked about this on our call, I think being, and I'm again using air quotes because this is all relative, being marginalized or being perceived as marginalized or being in a situation in a formative time in your life where you perceive yourself that way or you actually are, discriminated against, whatever. I think when you don't have access to typical or normal avenues, and again, interpret that how you may, it means that you come up with other tools and other ways of doing things and thinking about things and relating. So I think when you are queer, that's generally a given. And then if you're Black or African American, depending on your time and your place, then you have like this double opportunity to perceive in a quote unquote different way. But I kind of hate that word different because it's like, what does that mean? Like, what's the standard? What are we measuring this against? Anyway.
All right, Sarah, get in.
My palette looks like, I'm gonna use the term two-spirited in the way that there are times I cook and it feels like it's harsh, you know what I mean? And it's for a reason. It's bitter or there's a lot of vinegar, the flavors are harsh, But then there are other times when spirit will take over and there's something like callaloo soup that is gentle and comforting, and coconut and okra and things that we need at that time. So I feel like I'm gonna call my queer palette my two-spirited palette.
Beautiful.
And that's what
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna respond to this by looking at me and Chef Lazarus' work. If you've seen Son of a Southern Chef, I think the way you represent on Instagram is incredibly nuanced, and it's very gay. and I mean that in the sense of, we have values, right? And when you're this weird blend like me, Black, Jewish, gay, there would be no America without any of those three. We can say indigenous people, we can say Asian Pacific Islander people, but it's like you can't throw a stone, because we're very into hypervisibility, entertainment. That's where people see America more than anywhere else, and so that's why we're so there. But we also have these interesting ways of surviving. Part of it, I make a joke often when I talk about Black and Jewish food identities that we're the only two groups where we're insistent that people taste the food when it's not good. My mother would say, "Tastes this is nasty." And then I did, different synagogue dinners, and I'd be with my other people. Taste this, it's terrible. It's like we have to taste our oppression to believe we're. What the hell? Italian folks don't do that. Italian people cry if you eat something that they've made that's awful. Like, no, don't eat that, touch it. We're like, no, you have to eat it. But it's also about color. He got the color working today, but this color, it's about can you when I look at your food, I see Patrick Kelly. I see what's my eldest name? Andre
Leon Talley.
Yes, Leon Talley, yes, thank you. From North Carolina. I see all these, I see Rue, I see Billy Porter. Because we vibrate to the same tone. You know what I'm saying? We bring it because we want people to know that we are quoting different scripture than they are. That we're preaching a very different sermon. But it's something they can't live without. That's like when you talk about hot sauce and the wings and the flavor and the way that your cookbook's designed. He did not plant me for this. But I'm seeing Grace Jones, I'm seeing all kinds of layers of different representation that we've made. It's like the palette question is like the fashion question. When you look at our quilts, you see our music. You get what I'm saying? And then with our food, you get the spiritual part. We're the only people who have a cuisine named to something invisible, like God and love. We call it soul.
Hello.
So all those different pieces, and that's why it's something you can't capture. Yeah. There's no technique called soul. It is a feeling that you either have or you don't, and the taste memory that comes from being us cannot be duplicated in anybody's kitchen. I don't care if Rick Bayless tries it.
We call it drop cooking. I never saw measuring anything in my grandma's kitchen. I didn't
Intuition,
need it.
feeling.
Whenever someone tells me they're opening a Southern restaurant in New York, I'm like, like what? Nah. I was like, do you grow up eating it? No. We'll see how that works out. You can't. It's not a recipe.
It's not a recipe. And it's not an ingredient. When I went into camping in Canada, they had a food truck, and God bless his Canucks, but they had a southern food truck in Vancouver. I tried the freezer fried chicken child. Look how we're talking. Look how we're talking. Look, we are kikiing up here. And you know they did. Watch this. You're gonna love this, Sarah. You're gonna love. Wait a minute. It tasted smoky. What is this? They put smoked paprika in it, because it's southern. It's supposed to taste smoky. And I said, I don't listen. I told her, honey, I don't be putting maple syrup where it don't belong. Don't smoked paprika where it don't belong. But it's like we are that Patti LaBelle potato salad and sweet potato pie people. When we get together, it's funny when black gay men get together and cook, especially when I'm in my work in living history. It's really funny because all the black men in living history, not all, but 90% of us are bi, trans, gay. 90, and then when we do cooking, it's so hilarious because I'll be like, Don Davis and me be hanging out Don Tavius, first of all, right? I'll be like, Don Tavius, don't let him near that, don't let him near my pot now. He don't know how to cook, child, I know. And we just be, and it's funny because all the intonations of our grandmothers and our queer uncles and the preachers and deacons, all of it comes through us.
Yes, it does.
And that's what the palate tastes like. It tastes like sass. And it feels like heaven.
Great question. You lit us up with that. Thank you. Thank you. We probably have time for about one more question, shockingly. We have a lot to say up here, so is there another question for our guest? Oh, Miss Moretta Brown.
Thank you, Lee, for sharing my whole government name.
Blink that up.
I just have a very quick question. I go by Mo Brown as well. Lee and I farmed together for a season or two, and now I'm running an urban CSA in Berkeley.
Berkeley Basket, check it out.
So this question actually is for Michael Twiggy. You had shared something. I just wanted to get a clarification on this quote and the name of the person who said this because I want to go read this quote. You said that LGBT Black folks are the shaman of the spirit. And as someone who is still trying to uncover my spirituality and what that means for me and my work, when you shared that landed on my heart. I feel like I started singing internally, and then I realized I need to write this quote down, so, which is why I'm paraphrasing now. So I just wondered if you could repeat it and share where you.
Okay, sure. The title is evading me for a second, but the author is Malidoma Somen, and he's from the Dagara people of Burkina Faso. And we can right after this, I'll do the Google machine thing, and we'll have it. But it's a book about elements of spirituality, and he has another quote in there. He talks about how there's no the healers of the village were some of them were the lesbian women. Everybody knew they were lesbian. Everybody knew they were same-gender loving women. There was no secret. There was no shame. And then the other part of the healers were these non-binary men who everybody knew was gay or homosexual or whatever you want to. There's no appropriate word cross-culturally. But he says this is not an issue of shame for us. But he has another beautiful statement in that book. He goes, Western people fear tears because they seem like weakness. But in Africa, we know that tears are the truth melting down your face. And I was just like, okay. So yeah, definitely a really good, really important resource to get. And I think one thing we all should do at some point is try to build. I mean, I know there's things. There's no Black gay library without Zami, Audre Lorde. There's so many different resources, and I think we should really try to build up those reading lists musical lists. You know, for us, it's not just reading, it's how the sounds we hear. It's the films we see. I mean, Daughters of the Dust is one of the greatest black queer movies ever made, but nobody recognizes that. I mean, definitely for those folks who are Carolina related, you know, remember when that came out, people were like, what? Why they got this light-skinned lesbian woman, this other woman? Oh Lord! And those
I was like, because it's true.
It's true. That's what it was. But you know, share those lists among each other. You know, create that knowledge base. We know there's no damn curriculum about us, except for my sister's classroom. We know that doesn't exist in the mainstream. So we have to be the ones who do that. Just like we learned about our history from our parents, we have to do the same. Because we know that these things aren't talked about and aren't taught the way they should be. We got to make the curriculum. So.
And be the curriculum.
Now, be the curriculum.
We're gonna take one more. That was a nice, concise one. One more question, yes. Yes.
Oh. Hi, my name is Amber. I feel like y'all have already kind of answered this question, but are there particular foods that you hold reverence for because they are a witnessing for folks that you've lost? And if so, what is one of those?
So I skipped over this little bit of backstory. Prior to getting into the bar, but after leaving working as a visual artist in photo industry, I entertained working as a chef. So I became a server in a restaurant and then saw what was going on in the kitchen and I was like, ooh, no, I won't be doing that. It didn't seem like a good fit for me, and I wanted to be able to see people enjoying what I was making for them and have the interaction. That just wasn't going to happen in the kitchen. But that being said, I did spend a few years blogging about food. I don't know if you dug that up, Brian. I don't know how thorough your research was, but I did write an essay about lima beans because my grandmother Virginia would cook them, almost weekly. And I love the smell of the ham hock and the lima beans, cooking for 6-8 hours, sometimes overnight. And this is in Charleston, and I didn't know anyone else's family that actually cooked in that traditional manner. We had white rice every day, and sometimes chicken feed and stuff like that. I was like, ew, this is gross. But then as a college kid, I was like, wait, I know how to cook and my friends don't. So I know that were it not for that experience, I wouldn't have moved towards hospitality, having seen stuff like that from scratch. And I used to grow lima beans and different pole beans. And so a friend of mine, Nicole Taylor, has a blog,
Yes, Nicole.
The Food Culturist, and I was a guest blogger around Juneteenth a few years ago, and I wrote about my grandmother's lima beans.
My father passed away in 2015, and at the time I was a junior in college, and I just remember it feeling like the worst thing that could happen, because you just never expect something like that to happen. It was so sudden and abrupt. But my father, oh my God, he made pig feet, hot sauce. It was the peach cobbler. I say in the book, the lard-filled dough, of peach cobbler that came from canned peaches. And I was reproducing the recipe for the book, and I had a recipe tester, and she's a really well-known recipe tester, and she was working with me, and she's like, so you want these from the can? And I was like, yes, baby. So she's like, well, let me at least test it with fresh peaches. And I said, you can do whatever you want. I said, but the recipe will be from canned peaches. See, there's something to keeping the truth of what things were, without trying to change it, or I'm gonna say this, and I love the white people in the room, or make it appeasing to the white folks.
Respectability politics.
Respectability. See, I had publishers too. I've had publishers too say, oh, that recipe, people don't eat that way. No one's eating Spam. No one's eating corned beef. This was my dinner growing up. Corned beef from a can with tomatoes and onions. Have you ever seen corned beef? Out of the can. Okay, it looks like cat food. But baby, you put some onions on that, some vegetable oil, and you put that over some white rice, and that's a dinner. That's a meal. That's a meal. You know, so for me, it's all those things. It's not just the boiled peanuts. You know, I grew up in New York City. People don't expect. When I tell people this from the South, they're just like, "You ate that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I ate that. That was my childhood growing up." And it was also my mother, who was Guyanese, via London, and my mother and her saltfish and her curry and her pepper pot and her roti and all of those things. That was my childhood. So we cook and eat like that all the time. We have an expression in my family: "What is dinner without rice?" You know, because it's actually, what is dinner without rice? You know, because that's how we ate. Every meal had rice. And so there's a power, a beauty in sharing and passing down those recipes that really speak to your soul. And that's what wakes me up. That's what excites me. And so, you know, I'm all for the whole, you know, I know Brian here, he's a vegan. I know. You cook vegan food or, okay. He's like, yeah, I just eat those words awesome. You know, I believe in that, and I think my next book's gonna be a lot more, you know, vegan and everything. But there's a place, there's a time and a place. You know, we gotta have some chitlins. I remember going over to my Aunt Janice's house. I'm losing some folks now. I remember going to my Aunt Janice's house, and she lived in the 7th floor of the apartment building, and you could smell the chitlins.
Oh yeah.
You could smell it from the ground, from the lobby, honey. But my Aunt Janice would clean them chitlins for hours. Soak it in vinegar. You know, we have this whole thing now where we don't need to clean our chicken and everything. Dr. Oz said, don't clean the chicken. You're gonna spread more bacteria. Don't put water on the chicken. You know, but our folks, we clean that chicken, baby. You know, before it's cooked. So it's not only about the flavor and the food. It's about the process. It's about how it is done, and it's about preserving those traditions, whether or not they're actually improving the quality of the dish. It's about passing down that story. It's about passing down that legacy. That's what it's about.
Okra. Okra is the thing that literally held our family together. My grandmother, as a child, told me that that's what the Africans sent with us. And it was used as starch in our house. So my grandma would, the old okra, or lady's fingers as she called them, would be boiled, and then you strain it and you use that liquid to starch cloves. Wow. It was used as a Band-Aid. The same water would pour over a cut, and it would dry, and it would hold your cut together. Barbados' national dish is called kuku, and it's made with okra water. And it was the one thing that we had drummed into us, that okra was it was our lifeline. And so okra's my power vegetable.
So for me, it's 2 or 3 things. My mom passed away. We had a last Thanksgiving together, and my mother was the general pattern of the kitchen. You didn't mess with her, because I messed with her a lot. I got thrown out of our kitchen more than Melania throws down out of bed, and you came for it, and I came to give it. And my mother was insistent, and I remember the last apple crisp, that was our thing, without oats, thank you very much. I liberated my family from oats now. And my mother said to me, I remember I got the apples from all over Wisconsin, New York. I got like 10 different kinds of apples. And I made the vanilla, I got all this stuff. And my mother said to me, that is the best apple crisp that I have ever had. Not, you could have used some, right? No, that was the moment I knew it was sufficient. That the baton had gotten passed on. So when I made fried chicken, it's my grandmother, and it's just like, dang. I literally have like conversation with her, And when I go to different plantations, I will literally call on the spirit of whoever cook was in that kitchen. I know them by name. They're like, look. I'd be like, Miss Betty, ladies, let me burn this chicken. And it happens that way. Everything works out. And I'm just like, yeah. And with barbecue, it's my father and my grandfather and all the men in my family. You know, that is something that I revere. So it's all those, it's the ancestral part is there, the taste part is there, the process part is there, like the things that we remember. In our family, okra was Halloween costume. You know that one. They take okra on the forehead like devil's horns. And my grandmother's game was, don't get up from the table. In other words, don't get into trouble. You have to, you get more tea cakes if you don't let the okra slide off your face. So you have to stay very still, right? Or last but not least, at the stroke of midnight every year, to this day I do this, black-eyed peas in every purse and wallet, because that was my job, to go put the black-eyed peas. My mother had a billion purses. My mom would say, I ain't got no money, but I got a lot of purses. And I put black-eyed peas in every, and my grandma would say, if you keep them peas in your wallet, you're gonna be rich. Well, it worked. That's it.
For all your questions and your energy and all the love and life that you have been giving to this conversation. Can we give it up one more time for our beautiful speakers? And I just want to say that, again, one of the things that really stood out for me in our conversation today is the different ways in which you all are talking about using the privilege that you have as a platform. And sometimes making that platform yourself. And related to that, I also want to appreciate Bryant for inviting us all into this particular platform. And celebrating Blackness and queerness outside of both February and June. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass it back to you all to move things on.
Thank you all so much. And I also want to give a special round of applause to Lee for some big personalities here, and you did well. So I want to thank you all for coming. This is a beautiful space that we've created here at MoAD, and I hope that you all will support what we do. If you like the programming, if you want to continue to see programs like this, consider becoming a member. Or just tell all your friends and come back again. The program's not over yet. I do also want to remind you to fill out your survey. But we have a reception downstairs. We have several books that need to be purchased and will be signed. We have The Cooking Gene by Michael Twitty. We have Tiki, Modern Tropical Cocktails by Shannon Mustafer. And we have Son of a Southern Chef by Lazarus Lynch. We also have Afro Vegan by Brian Terry. So buy your books, get them signed, and there's delicious food, empanadas from El Porteño, and a special cocktail. What's the name of the cocktail?
There are two actually, folks. So one is, we got two cocktails in the book. One is a parasol. It's a really fun banana and what's in the drink again? No, banana pineapple daiquiri, and then another one is like a navy grog with tangerines. There's also some spirits to sample neat if you want to try a couple different rums, all donated by Anchor, which is great. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we want to thank our sponsor for that. And just one more special thank you to Kaiser Permanente for supporting the program. Okay, great. Thank you all.